Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm going to start from where Pratap Bhanu Mehta left off yesterday in his very illuminating talk, where he said that the relative emphasis of economic debate today is on securing a consensus. And therefore, he said some interesting things on culture, which I'm not qualified to comment on. But I want to take you back and ask whether there ever was an economic debate in which the principal people who bear the consequences of economic decisions, who are essentially not the poor so much. The poor are completely dependent on your being able to alleviate their poverty, either temporarily or permanently, but at least people who earn the minimum wage at any point in history. Were they ever part of economic decision making? And the answer is no, because economic debates chiefly occur amongst the oligarchies that run countries, what Pratap politely called the elites, and I would call the oligarchies in the economic sense. So the oligarchy that ran India, more or less since independence up to, I would say, 1991, also had a consensus. And that consensus was that this economy would be principally directed for the first 25 years of its existence at securing the independence of India. It will interest you to know that the word poverty crops up in Indian economic discourse for the first time only in 1969. There was no intention to develop the economy with the purpose of raising within a 5 or 10 year time frame the living standards of the people. The intention was to develop an economy that changed its structure from being an import dependent, agriculture dependent economy to an economy that was vested with the tools that allowed it to protect its independence, that is heavy industry, not services, heavy industry, science and technology, and higher end learning. So what India did for the first 20-25 years was to make investments way above its economic pay grade. Okay? Which is why for the younger people, all this business about Nehru is actually a lot of rubbish. You've got to understand, you may not agree with what they did, but you've got to understand what the consensus was about. And I think there was a fairly widespread consensus amongst people that these were important investments to make. But what that meant for all the people of India, rich and poor, was that India was a rationed economy when it came to consumption. Everything was rationed. I am 54 years old. So for the first 25 years of my life, everything was rationed. Your food was rationed, your railway tickets were rationed, your airline tickets were rationed, your automobiles were rationed, your two-wheelers was rationed, your sugar was rationed, therefore your sweets were rationed, what you could serve at weddings was rationed, even your alcohol was rationed. If an industrialist in 1985 wanted to buy a S-Class or whatever class then Mercedes, they couldn't just go and buy it, right? They couldn't even import it. They would have to wait for a diplomat to sell it, and then something called the State Trading Corporation would sell it to you second hand. Your foreign exchange was rationed, so you couldn't really go abroad with much money to travel. In any case, your airline seats were rationed. Okay? So we ran a fundamentally rationed economy. And in that economy, therefore, one generation above me, aspirations were limited. What can you do in a rationed economy? It's a boring place. Either you quit the game, which lots of Telugus did, and went abroad. Okay, you just quit the game. I don't want to live in a rationed economy. I'm out of it. And then the rationed economy treated you very kindly because you had foreign exchange. So you could jump the queue in getting a railway ticket. You could jump the queue in getting an airline ticket. You could import, a bottle of expensive wine if you wish, because you lived abroad. And you could, your relatives could sort of bottom feed off you and enjoy your existence. I did. My cousin went to America in 1982, and I got, as a consequence, my first pair of Levi jeans, and I was very happy. Okay. But the point I'm making is twofold with this: that in this rationed economy, there was an egalitarianism of rationing because everybody's lives were rationed. So obviously, the rich lived more comfortably than the less rich, and so on, as is common anywhere in the world. But the rich also faced rationing. It wasn't that simple to get a telephone. It wasn't that simple to travel abroad, even if you had the money. It wasn't that simple to buy an air ticket, even if you had the money. It wasn't that simple to build a house, even if you had the money, because the land was rationed, and what you could build was rationed, and the cement was rationed, and the windows were rationed. Okay. And this is very important, especially for the younger generation, to understand that there was rationing, and it was not a very pleasant place to live, in my view. It was safe, it was quiet, but if you had any sort of excitement, then you really wanted more and you couldn't get it. But there was an egalitarianism in this quietness and in this shallowness. To run such an economy, therefore, you needed to have a state whose principal business was rationing, and therefore a very attractive place to go if you didn't go abroad and quit the game, if you wanted to play the game in India, was to join the state, which was the favored option of many people in those days, in the elite. You could join the state in the following ways. You could join the Indian Armed Forces, and then you had your own private rationing system. You could take part in a competitive exam, and then you could become part of the ration, which means you had exclusions. And in a sense, so if you joined the state, you had a telephone. If you didn't join the state, you joined the queue. If you joined the state, you could pick up your phone and talk to your batchmate and get a railway ticket. If you didn't, you'd have to hope that one of your friends got into the service and beg of them to get you a ticket, right? So those who didn't exit either joined the state or became appendages of the state, like journalists. Why do you see journalist colonies everywhere? Because journalists were used to receiving government largesse. That is how they function. They got land, they built a cooperative housing society, they got a house. Most people of my generation and older have built houses which have been subsidized by the rationing state, either through the grant of subsidized land or and then the grant of cement, permits, blah, blah, blah. Okay? There was no market as such for housing. It was very small. And if you came from places like Bombay, even rents were controlled. So even that stock of housing was rationed. So most of your life was spent in dealing with rationing, which meant dealing with the rationing state. So it made sense to join the rationing state. The rationing agent, which was the state. So in a nutshell, that's my take on the economy from 1947 to 1991. Was it successful? Because rationing was a consequence? Yes, it was. You made investments above your pay grade. You got your IITs. You got your aims. Note that you're not getting them anymore. You're getting things called IITs and aims. You're not getting them. And you had a situation in my profession where the Delhi School of Economics had more or less the same quality of faculty, or JNU, as any good school anywhere in the world. There was movement. Civil servants too, much more competent than now, because the total size of the elite was small, the total size of the state was small, and 5 IITs plus 3 IIMs plus 1 St. Stephen's College and a few other institutions like that were enough to run the country. Okay. 1991 was a benchmark because the rationing model fell apart, because one of the things we had to ration as a consequence of being this kind of economy was foreign exchange. And for a variety of reasons which I wouldn't go into, we ran out of foreign exchange. And when we ran out of foreign exchange, we had to open up the economy. And that opening up is the beginning of what people now call the India story. Okay? Notice I've told you all this without any jargon. When somebody uses jargon, they don't know what they're talking about. In India, people use a lot of jargon, and it tells me they're badly educated. I detest jargon. There is no need to speak in jargon when you're speaking about something that all of us are involved with, like the economy. So in 1991, what was the fundamental thing that happened? Notice how I'm avoiding jargon like liberalization. What essentially happened was that you stopped rationing, to some extent imports, to some extent the ability to produce without a license meant that you could produce more, and to some extent the change in policy was that stuff that made our lives more luxurious could now be purchased by you freely if you had the money. Starting with a two-wheeler, and then gradually across the 90s, going up the food chain to a computer, to a phone, to an air conditioner, okay? And you could buy apartments which look much better than the dingy stuff that I grew up in. You could, if you could afford it, you could buy an apartment with the windows opened and shut well. Fast forward, you could buy Italian kitchens. Fast forward, you could go abroad for your holidays. Fast forward, the India growth story. What is the hallmark of this growth story? The hallmark of this growth story lies in what are now the leading indicators of the Indian economy. What are the leading indicators of the Indian economy? All these people who think they're in New York but are actually living in that slum city called Bombay, but fantasize that they're in New York and talk the language of New York when they're not New York, they're just a financial center in one of the poorest countries in the world. What are the leading indicators? The leading indicators are automobiles, two-wheelers, fast-moving consumer goods, air travel, not rail travel, right? And high-end consumables. Throughout this lockdown and this recent so-called good news that came, what was the good news you got? Maruti is selling more cars. Okay? So this is great. As a result of unlocking the rationing, it meant that people at the top of the income chain who either had the money or by participating in adding value to the things that were unrationed, and that ranges from, with disgusting results in my view, from TV channels, right? The entire media industry on TV, this mindless thing that many people do, I don't, flicking through 36 channels and watching people, some kind of primitive, uneducated Roman circus that goes on. But it's private sector, so it's free. And you make money off the people who do this, and they make money somewhere else by getting a job. And they go to malls, and the people who run malls make money. But fundamentally behind this is the purchasing power increase that was generated for the top 50 million of the population, then the next 50 million, and then I would say today, somewhere 100 to 150 million of the population. And those of you who were sentient adults, and I don't mean that in an age sense. In India, I think it is unwise to confuse sentient adult with age from what I've seen recently. We'll remember the good times between 2003 and 2008. I always think of Vijay Mallya when I think of that time. Those were the great times for the Indian economy. Everybody that I knew was making money. I felt bad I was abroad. I was not participating in this orgy of increase in money making. And that is when actually we jumped from about the top 60 to 70 million of the Indian population to the 150 million of the Indian population. Growth rates went to double digit, but the leading indicators of the economy stayed the same. Cars, FMCG, two-wheelers, air travel, Vistara, Jet Airways, business class, right? Fine dining, holidays in Venice, destination weddings in Vienna. And if you couldn't afford that, destination weddings in Goa, depending on where you go on this food chain. But remember, throughout this, wherever you live, we are only talking about Gachi Bauli, another great fantasy of the Andhra mind. Gachi Bauli with Vastu. I went there and I was shocked. This pretense of wanting to live in Phoenix, Arizona, but Vastu means you watch your colleagues' underwear because of Vastu. Stuck, bad luck. But that dream fueled growth. I'm saying two things to you. One, I'm saying growth in India was never export led. That's all. rubbish. Except in a mildly good year, exports have never been the engine of growth in India. It's always been a dream that India will export. India is therefore not China, not South Korea, not Japan, not Malaysia, not even Germany. Indian growth has always been domestic demand-led. It would be nice if Indian growth were export-led, but that's not the case. India's share in world trade is piffling today and was piffling yesterday. It's so piffling, I'm not even going to tell you what it is. It's way under 3%. Okay. But there was good growth in air conditioners, mobile phones, TV channels, and people who earned 7 to 8 times the minimum wage wherever they live participated in this growth. Less in Bihar, more in Hyderabad, but they participated in this growth. And as they got prosperous, their demand increased, and that demand fueled more increases in the output of the leading indicators of the Indian economy. What about the people who earn the minimum wage or twice the minimum wage? What happened to them? What was their story? None of you are here. The people who earn the minimum wage or twice the minimum wage. None of you are here. None of you in this room are remotely likely, thanks to your parents and your asset class, to ever be in that situation. One thing about living abroad is you tend to be in that situation. At times in your life I have, and then you learn what it is to live at the minimum wage. And I can tell you, and I'm saying this for a reason, that at the minimum wage, so I'm not talking about the poor again, no, I'm just talking at the minimum wage. That takes me from 150 million to about 400 to 500 million Indians, half the population, no more. Why the other half I'm excluding? One is they're poor, or also the people who are, a large proportion of people who are not poor, are just have a high probability of becoming poor again. So they're as good as poor. They're very vulnerable. So they're caught in this trap, and that's at least half the country. It was about 75% according to Arjun Singutta committee 13 years ago. I'm being charitable. Let's say it's half the country. So, but they're not going to contribute to your growth story. They can't. They're just trying to survive. So, what happens to them? Now, put yourself in the shoes of someone earning the minimum wage. What are your aspirations? Your aspirations, in my view, are 5 things. You want a decent meal. You want to wear clothing that is decent. You don't want to go around, notwithstanding Gandhiji, without wearing a reasonable upper garment and lower garment. You would like to build a house like all of us do in your lifetime. Not me personally, but most of you seem to want to build houses. So you would like to own a house in your lifetime. Maybe a bequest to your kids. You would like to have access to affordable education. And you would like to have access to affordable healthcare. 5 things. Correct? Now, when I say affordable, please remember, it doesn't matter who produces it. In principle, either you are getting affordable education because the community has decided that they're going to give you affordable quality education using taxpayers' money, or you should be able to afford to go and buy it. I don't care which. I'm an economist. I'm agnostic about whichever works. Same with healthcare. If you look at these 5 things, number one, they are not part of the leading indicators of the economy. 5 things that half of India has aspiration to achieve with their own income are not a part of leading indicators. They're absent. Number 2, all of them is a case of abject failure. Food is a scandal. I have tried for 4 years to calculate the non-subsidized price of a square meal, by which I don't mean just, rice and dal. I mean proper protein, some fruit, some nutrients. And I have failed because there are input subsidies, there are output subsidies, there are sideways subsidies. Okay? And I'm not going to elaborate this, with the current sort of so-called reforms, what is going on. And most important in the case of food, the people who produce food commit suicide at a rate that is far greater than your average stockbroker. I started my life as a stockbroker. It's a tense job. I can see why you should commit suicide. But in India, I don't see stockbrokers jumping off the Lal Street, especially now pandemic. They're making money, right? But farmers commit suicide on a regular basis. It's embarrassing. They've been committing suicide all my life. Either they're committing suicide in Telangana or in Vidarbha or somewhere. They're committing suicide. No, large numbers of them. Why? Because if you were a farmer and you're faced with a a situation where from morning 6 o'clock till night 10 o'clock, your entire production process, your entire business process is completely at the mercy of other people taking decisions for you on what you will produce, how much you will produce, where you will sell, what you will get for it. You will commit suicide. Or you will go and borrow and default, and I have complete sympathy with you. Because we have lost control over your life, you might as well game the bloody system and make the taxpayer pay for it every 10 years. So food A is not a leading indicator, and B is not part of our consumption, is not part of, on the supply side, is not in any way a business. When I recommended, which ultimately I think, I'm not just saying my input, became this doubling farmers' income thing. The point I was trying to make many years ago was, why don't you look at the farmer's balance sheet? Why is it always that you're talking about growing more food? What about the price at which it's sold? Isn't it sold too cheap? Shouldn't it be more expensive? But the moment prices go up, you start importing onions. Right? It's another matter that somebody else makes the money, that's part two. But the entire farming business in India, we've got to look at, and this arrogant assumption that too many people on the land, we must get them off, gives you a very good illustration of how we think about the land. Who are you or me to tell people to get off the land? Obviously, they'll do it if they can. They're migrated to our cities, no? And you've treated them very badly, but they're migrated to our cities. So if you create opportunities, they will go for those opportunities, and there's nothing to say that agriculture or rural India should not be creating opportunities. The fact that you've failed to create them means that now you're copying out by saying that the people for whom you failed to create opportunities are people who should get off the land. Okay, this is rubbish. This is not just bad economics, it reveals the lack of a moral compass, which I find deeply troubling. When people talk about people who live on, people talk about people occupying agriculture as some kind of a redundant, asset. That's one. Let's go to clothing. This shirt I'm wearing today is from Marks and Spencer. It's a bit faded now. I haven't had a chance to buy new ones. I like to dress well. Therefore, I buy expensive shirts. This shirt cost, when I bought it, 3,000 rupees. In fact, the price of a Marks and Spencer shirt in India and London are the same. Not PPP, just the same. And you know what? 90% of the shirt is made in India. I discovered that other than the shoes collar, everything else is sourced and made here. Some are imported from Cambodia, but that's more supply chain management. Broadly speaking, the total amount of Marks and Spencer shirts sold in India, if you take exports of shirts from India minus imports to India, 90-95% Indian quality. But if you go and buy a 400 rupee shirt, if you go to Charminar, I suppose, I don't know where you go in Hyderabad, I can't remember. But in Bombay, say Fashion Street, or in Delhi, Sarojini Nagar, and try and buy a 400 rupee shirt, which is what the minimum wage guy wears. 82% of these are imported from Bangladesh and India. What is happening here? You can make shirts, 4,000 rupee shirts, but you can't make 400 rupee shirts in India. Why is that happening? Because you're able to cater for the consumption of the top 100, 150 million, but you're not competent to cater for the consumption of the bottom 350, the next 350 million. Because remember, the next half don't wear shirts. So we don't have to worry about them. Okay? Or they wear torn shirts. They're not economic contributors. Housing. What a racket. First, we had what I call the cooperative society racket in the rationing period, where the racket was the middle class, were guaranteed more or less that if they got together and applied pressure, they would get a cheap plot of land sometime in their lifetime. There was a food chain. First IAS officers, then police officers, then other government officers, then army officers, then navy officers, then provincial civil service officers, then clerks, then lawyers, then journalists. But every middle class community got a plot of land somewhere. That's why you find a lot of places called journalist colony, doctors colony, professors colony, right? Sure, that then Secunderabad is there. Then when that racket ended, the middle class found they could afford to buy housing, and so you had this massive increase in the housing boom. In the segment where you could go and get EMIs and buy your house, but if you could not get EMIs and buy your house, you could not afford that level of income, you lived in a slum. Or you went into these highly irregular colonies, you went into shady deals, you went into the informal sector. Therefore, real estate, as we define it, where you and I live, is part of the leading indicators of the Indian economy, but housing is not. Education, I don't want to comment about. It's finished. We don't have the capability to build one extra IIT that works, one extra AIMS that works. We're still stuck fundamentally, let's be honest, with those 5 IITs and 4. Others all usual Indian bullshit, bluster. Okay, I'm not falling for that bluster. All right. You built one Indian business school in Hyderabad. Congratulations. Rich kids come and study there. You have built Ashoka University. Congratulations. You haven't done much more at the higher education level. At the lower education level, things have collapsed. And education is not a leading indicator of the Indian economy in terms of its output composition, contribution to growth. Neither is healthcare. So the five things that would have been things that the next segment of the population, 150 million to 400 million demanded, are not leading indicators of the economy. In fact, they are rationed, and severely so. They continue to be rationed across the 30-year period I'm talking about, for everybody except us. So the bulk of India continues to live in a rationed economy just as we did, except now it's an inegalitarian rationed economy because the top 150 million have exited rationing and the remainder are still there. And now you want the government of India and the government of Andhra Pradesh to behave like a modern government. They don't think their obligation is not just to serve you, nor are the economic policies designed to serve you. A consequence of the economy continuing to be rationed for most Indians is that the government of India still functions as a rationing state and therefore a highly incompetent, corrupt and ineffective state when it comes to addressing aspirational challenges like growth, or for that matter, equity. Okay? And this is not a debate, but it is becoming one now, and I'm very happy it is, because this growth story of the top 150 million, I began to see the record. Oh, you guys don't remember record players. What is an appropriate analogy in contemporary times? I began to see the what is it called? What is that thing called, Ajayji? The thing you put in, no? What is it called? Music.
The needle. The needle.
No, not the needle. That's records. They won't understand.
The playing arm. The playing arm.
The USB. The USB.
The pen drive. Pen drive.
That pen drive, my computer began warning me, is getting corrupted. Songs are not playing. Music is not playing. That was after the financial crisis in 2008. So I began doing some research into it. And I began to see signs of weakness, which I'll tell you about in 2 minutes. But let me just cut now and say that I began to warn that unless we began to switch from the leading indicators of the economy being what the top 150 million consume to the 5 things I've mentioned at least, this economy story is over. Our growth story is over. We will enter a middle income trap. The age of aspirations is over. And COVID has punched a nice hole, which has just brought my forecast of doom, I think, 5 years forward. And an opportunity, but that's another matter. So to summarize, you had growth that was fueled by the demand of and the participation in the production of the top 150 million. The rest of India continues to live in a rationed economy. As a consequence, when you have expectations of the state or of society, those expectations are not met. And I want to give you an example of social expectations. Indian parents as an asset class, none of you, I'm sure you're all very good parents, are horrible. I have never seen such a horrible parenting community, maybe other countries in South Asia. Their only interest is their children, especially boys, become factors of production to take care of them in their old age. They have no other interest in their child's emancipation, learning. It is because society is rationed. It was like that in my time. So in a rationed society, you had to take a competitive exam, so you had to study. The purpose of studying was to take a competitive exam. There was no other purpose of studying. And when you took competitive exams to become what? To become things that the modern India needed. So if you're building these above pay grade things, and most important, it's not really modern India, it's the chance to go abroad. You became engineer Garu, or you became doctor Garu. Both these things get you exit this horrible game that was there. But you still want them to become engineer Garu and doctor Garu. Because now you see some IT industry and you see these Chetan Bhagat novels. So you say that, not that my child will be a happy engineer or a happy doctor. I have no problem with people doing these things. But you force them to go into things where they can earn the credentials to take competitive exams. So this is probably the only country I have lived in where an engineer, I have every respect for engineers and chartered accountants, every respect for them, are reified intellectually over physicists. You know, which other country you go and tell your parents, you know, Dad, I want to be an astronomer. Oh my God, what are you saying? You want to be an astronomer? Who is going to earn? Who is going to build a house? Go and become an engineer. Go and become an engineer, buy me a house in Gachiba. Okay. But they're doing this because many of their lives, I mean, their lived experience of these parents, their exited rationing is rational experience. They're translating that. Kids can work against it. But for the rest also, they're operating in a rationing system. Therefore, it continues to be the case that in that 150 to 400 million, the most prized job is a government job till today. They don't have the option of exiting this game, and you're not letting them enter the top 150. So they'll go for government service. Government service is a social contract. You pass an exam, you come into government, I pay for you whether you work or not. Unless you do something horrible, you get paid. Sounds like a good contract, and you avoid getting exploited. Now, this is supposed to be a great aspirational G20 country, and what I'm saying is ringing true to you. I hope it is. Where are we? So the end of the India story also means the end of a project where aspiration was possible for everybody. So the other thing you see as a consequence of this, unfortunately, is that because the top 50 million have basically become Atmanirbhar, independent of the state, until now when the ED is getting I don't like it. But it is also a consequence of an extremely weak state. I'll give you a number in a minute if you go to shock you, trying to assert its strength. The state, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the Indian state has never been as weak as it is now. And a lot of the bluster you see, a lot of the overriding of, constitutional proprieties you see, a lot of the craven submission you see, is actually a reflection of the weakness of the state, especially in its economic project. And I'll give you a simple metric. If you measure the size of the government of India as a proportion of its total spending as a proportion of GDP, the government of India has shrunk from 21% of GDP in 1991 to less than 12% of GDP now. In terms of its size, measured as proportion of GDP, it is half what it was. The only department of the government of India that has seen an increase in its numbers and its budget, until very recently, we slightly expanded our diplomatic service, that doesn't count budgetary, is the Ministry of Home Affairs. And that is because the number of paramilitary personnel in this country recruited has gone up from about 500,000 post-Punjab in 1989, I found this out of the Pay Commission, to over 1.2 million in 2016. Okay? So you have a state that is investing in coercive power because it is weak. It is weak because it is engaged in rationing, which is a costly business to administer and results in many disgruntled people, especially if some are progressing fast and the others are not. So you have a weak state. You have a society which has very low fraternity. And I've written about this. I don't have time to go into it. I'll give you an example of it, but let me explain what I mean by fraternity. You know the Indian Constitution, if you read the preamble, it says the state shall secure liberty and equality for all its citizens, but shall strive to promote fraternity. Okay? Now the Constitution fathers are luckily not on Twitter, so you can't call them stupid. So that is the normal reaction to anything that is not understood nowadays. But let me tell you why they said that. Very simply, because a state cannot promote fraternity, only we can. A society, this Zoom call, is a place where we can be fraternal. We can obey the rules. I would be very, very loath to give everybody listening to this call, if you had put everybody on Zoom, control over unmuting themselves. In a low fraternity society, you would not do that. In a high fraternity society, it is possible. An example of that is traffic. In 2018, the Delhi police issued 1.2 million traffic fines. you can't say they're not doing their job. That's a lot of fines. For those of you who have seen Delhi, the traffic is even worse than Hyderabad. Okay? And it is worse not because of the police or because the roads are small. It is worse because people don't follow rules, people don't have courtesy, people don't give way on a roundabout, for example, something they do all over the world. And this has been true since I was born. Traffic has always been a selfish navigation. Earlier, because only elites owned cars, at least there was a check. So people behave very badly, people who own cars with two-wheeler drivers, I remember that. But there was a check that if you bang into somebody's car, just maybe somebody you knew. The elite was small. Now that check is also gone and the number of cars has gone up. All right? So, low fraternity combined with exacerbated inequality, expanded low fraternity. Example 2. You guys have exited dealing with people between the 150 to 400 million, so have I. I need to deal with them professionally, but otherwise I've exited in my personal. When I was young, I went to a school where it was quite common to meet people earning 2 to 3 times the minimum wage, because the business model in Bombay was I went to a government school. It was an aided school. The aid was very small, and everybody could come there, and the teaching was good. Some posh kids went to cathedral and places like that. I didn't. Hyderabad public school. But if you went to a normal Saint something school, or what is that school called, Picket in Hyderabad, you were okay. Your teachers were okay. You all got bad education, but it wasn't so bad. But most important, you all equally got bad education. Now your kids get reasonably good education, and if they don't, you are exporting them. And I'll tell you something. A joint secretary to the government of India, okay, that's income of about pre-tax of about 2 lakhs a month, with a spouse perhaps earning half, with no other out of character responsibilities at that stage of his or her life, which is in their early 50s, can actually afford to send their child abroad to study university. It's expensive. We have to sacrifice many things, but it's not unaffordable. For my father, it was unaffordable. When I went out to do my PhD, I had to get a scholarship. There was no other option. It was not affordable, period. Now it is profoundly affordable. So you're exiting Indian universities. And when you're exiting Indian universities, you're complaining that the quality of it is going down. 15 years ago, we exited the Indian railways. We got Indigo. Right? And the quality of the railways went down. So keeping public goods alive involves joint consumption of these goods so that quality is kept up. And that is the other societal check that has gone. I'll take an example of healthcare. Forget your insurance prevails. I know from a recent experience last year that the cost of a heart attack successfully treated in a major hospital in Delhi is about 5 to 6 lakhs. Now, I put it to you that anybody in the top 100 to 150 million, which would be the bottom of that, would be earning about 50,000 rupees a month. That's only 1.5 years' salary for a lifetime event. It is very expensive. You will have to do without, you will have to make compromises. It is affordable. There is no commensurate affordable thing available to anybody below that number, except through rationing. So it's much worse than you think. And on top of that, you have elite abandonment. The total amount of imports of education that this country did in 2013 was $500 million. Last year, it was above $5 billion. Healthcare imported from abroad has gone up by 400%. Which is why when you have COVID, our hospitals collapse because the business model collapses because medical tourism and our income, which was keeping these things afloat, has gone. That was our healthcare model. You see how fragile the demand base is. So we have a problem with the state, we have a problem with the society, and we have a profound inferiority complex on top of it all about how we deal with the world. And that is my penultimate point. When we deal with the world, we are very proud of the fact that our GDP is the 4th or 5th, I can't remember, I don't care. But remember, your GDP is only poor because you're a large joint family, if you're a family at all, with a lot of poor people, and that adds up. Okay? That is why India is a whatever $1 trillion economy. If India, the days when I dreamed that India would grow at 8% in a calculation, that even if India grew at 8% GDP per capita per annum, the per capita income in India would not even be 1/3 of that of Belgium by 2035. So please, let's get real about where we are. We are not China. And we have a long way to go. Okay. Just because some of us can simulate the lifestyles of the West and globalization allows us to pretend, not pretend, we actually are, and that's another factor of alienation I don't have time to go into, that we are part of that globalized lifestyle doesn't mean that our country is rich. It's a very poor country. A lot of people die of TB here. A lot of people die of malnutrition. They die of very third world things. Our interactions with each other, our social structure is essentially very third world. Our state is third world at low capacity. Our education system has collapsed. We are showing every symptom, notwithstanding the size of our GDP, that an unsuccessful third world country shows. The penultimate thing I want to say, looking forward, is that this movie that I've been describing in India is a movie that has played out in every country of the world since the Second World War. And I have to inform you that this movie typically has a tragic ending. You end up finally in what is called the status of a middle income country. Lots of poverty, lots of inequality, disease, malnutrition, bad education, crime goes up. You become Brazil. You become Argentina. You become Egypt. You become South Africa. You become Thailand. You become the Philippines. Zero aspiration countries, caught in a middle income trap, unable to get out of it. We are not there yet. But boy, we are going there fast. This is becoming a non-aspirational country that is unwilling to make the structural changes necessary to get out of the middle income trap. And the structural change that we need to make is not to build SEZs in export mode, but to try and ensure that the output composition of our growth changes. So that my dream is, let's say 60 to 70% of our output comes from the 5 things that the 500 million people, including us, need, which is a square meal, decent clothing, one house, purchased, and I have solutions for each of these. I don't have time to go into them. I've in fact written about them. Please Google. Each of these are written, except education I've given, because that is too complicated. It has to do with our social psychology and I can't get into it. Healthcare, education, housing, 5 things. If these are 60%, and therefore become the leading indicators of the Indian economy in Bombay, that's very important. I'm an economist. I'm not talking about subsidized delivery. Please understand. I'm saying that a 15 lakh house should be an affordable business proposition, at least minus the land cost. I can solve the problem. I have solved it. And that house then needs to be bought with somebody with dignity, getting EMIs at an affordable price across 20 years. Somebody who earns at least twice the minimum wage or minimum wage. That will result in people stopping to talk about rubbish like artificial intelligence and what the employment problem is. All the 5 things I've said is where the employment is. So if people produce, if people consume these things, or those people who consume these things will then be employed in producing them and will then be able to afford to consume them more and more and more and more, you will have a strong economic base, you will have a resilient economy, and you will get rid of rationing, which is the most crippling thing in all its dimensions that inhibits doing business in India. And you will not have to game the World Bank sitting in India. You'll really be able to reduce the cost of doing business in India because you will reduce the requirement for rationing, and then you can dream about a more capable and a more effective state and better institutions. Because, ladies and gentlemen, when you have rationing, economic rationing, you cannot have a capable state, you cannot have effective institutions. Rationing necessarily involves the asymmetric use of power, and when you have inegalitarian rationing like you have now, that is only going to exacerbate. You will, however, need to have changes in society, which I don't have time to go into. You will need to find a pathway for parents to understand that it is extremely inefficient of them to convert their children into mechanical producers and coders. You will have to have a world where when a parent sees a frequent ad I get on social media, which is, your son can be a coder by 18. This is not a dream for a child. A dream for a child should not be to be a character in a Chetan Bhagat novel. A child, especially a bright child, should have the ability to dream more. When rich people even are secure enough to allow their children to become philosophers, and when farmers are secure enough not to feel the indignity of being alienated. So there are social structure questions also here, many of which will involve something very important, But let me just recap once. We need to change the output composition of demand so that we can get a more effective state, so that we can get better institutions. But to change that output composition of demand, we will need to change the way in which society operates. We will need to take decisions which actually give assets to be able to produce these things. I'll give you one example. The largest landowner in this country and the largest shareholder in this country is who? Who is the largest shareholder in this country? It's not Ambani. Who is the largest landowner in this country? It's not Ambani. It is the government of India. Who owns that land and who owns those shares there? Why are they not being deployed, as the Prime Minister has tried to do, to his credit, to develop mass, low-cost, affordable housing? Commercial. Why is it not being deployed to provide mass, affordable education? India is a resource-poor country, but India is an asset-rich country. Except the state has control over those assets for legacy reasons. And the big conversation on how to effect this change is how to use those assets, not just to privatize them, how to use them to create this output composition of demand. And the key to this is not to think of inclusive growth, but to think of productive inclusion. My final point. Productive inclusion means that, see, there's a society, you can have one society, which is what you may have heard some of it is universal basic income. I hate the idea. It is an idea that should only be implemented in a country that has lost all aspirations of a happy ending to the movie. So we are 100 people in this Zoom call, let's say. And let's say me and Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Ramanathan are doing all the producing of output. And we are nice people, so we decide to have a universal basic income. So of what we produce, all of you will get some money. But the economy will still, of this Zoom call, will still be determined by what we consume. And since we are only 3, the GDP is not going to go up, and certainly not the GDP per capita. Right? So universal base, so what we call in economics the Calder-Hicks transfer, which is basically a few people produce and you get an egalitarian society by giving income to those who haven't earned enough according to your social value. That's the basis of a welfare state. That cannot be a solution for a country that wants to grow by engaging people more in the business of growing. I call that productive inclusion. That people must be engaged and involved in producing, so they, just like we did, they get prosperous. And when they get prosperous, they consume the things they want to do. And then they elevate their consumption, and then other people come in. You don't worry about employment then, because doing this is jobful. And you don't worry about the government's fiscal deficit because this reduces the subsidy and rationing load. So you get better institutions and you become the happy ending, which you are not going to see unless we do something. In my days, you know, movies came in reels. I'm from Bombay, so I know a bit about Bollywood. 18 reels hote the. I'd say we are somewhere, we were in reel 12. We have a chance to rewrite this. Corona has made us reel 14. We have 4 more reels. I have failed you. I'm 54. So young people here, I can tell you, do something about it. But doing something about it is not going to happen through designing apps. It's not going to happen, going back to what Pratap said, by pretending that the solution to this is technocratic. It's not going to happen by changing the political party in power. It's not going to happen by reforming a bureaucracy through natural entry. It's not going to happen through getting experts into the system. It needs political and social mobilization. And you have to get out of the mindset where we, those older than you, have crippled your ability to mobilize by crippling your ability to think of yourself as somebody who has the right to dream and aspire and therefore to educate as opposed to get credentials to live. Thank you.
That was absolutely stunning, Rathin. Thank you so very much. This was absolutely brilliant. Would you like to amplify on the last thing that you said of mobilization? Then I'll get on to the question answers. And the second thing is, would you tell us what is it that the state or the citizens should be doing?
Yes, so I think those are actually the only 2 questions that I need to answer.
Yeah.
I don't know what other questions you have, but please don't ask me about WTO. Not interested. The first question I will answer through my favorite theme or my favorite disappointment, which is education. Right? See, I don't know. In Hyderabad, of course, there are examples. Mehboob College. My own city, Bombay, Ruya College, where I studied in Delhi, St. Stephen's College, Hindu College, Hansraj College. These are not called government college number 1, government college number 2. They start with IIT. I'm sure now IIT will also be called the India Upadhyay IIT. I don't know. I'm surprised the Gandhis didn't call them all Rajiv Gandhi IITs, but because that also, that kind of naming obsession shows that you don't have any skin in the game. That's all you can do. Weak state. Weak state renames. Strong state builds more. Why were these there? These were there because there was a social consciousness and therefore a social movement. And by the way, that's also the key to Kerala's success in education. That where society said that it is an important public good that people must be educated, and it is too important a task to be left to the state. And so society got involved, not just in building colleges, but also in advocating for education. My mother tells me that when she in Kakinada, rural Kakinada, in the early 50s, they used to go around to villages saying, please wash your hands, please clean your hands. Okay? It was not done by a secretary sitting in Delhi and some Swachh Bharat mission, because society was engaged in Swachh Bharat mission. And until society is not engaged, you do it as a technocratic act, people will still spit on the roads of Hyderabad when you are having corona, and you will be able to do nothing about it. There has to be engagement and social engagement, and that social engagement will bring fraternity. So that is what then the state will respond to and bring its complementary resources as a political construct to addressing these issues. But until society does not leaves it to the state, we are not going to progress as an economy. So we are lacking an economic ideology and therefore an economic debate. And I'm offering an economic ideology. And because we lack an economic ideology, and I think this is what Pratap was referring to, we lack the ability to drive either the state or the private sector in directions that bring an increase in common prosperity, which as an economist, I think is an essential ingredient for the common good. On the second, sorry, your second question was much more profound. What was it?
What 5 things, or what do you think could be done, 5 prescriptions that you could give?
Create a massive slum-free India program by 2023. And that can be done exclusively in every city you name by using government land. Central government land. Hyderabad, I don't need to belabor the point. But for that, you'll have to confront something called the Indian Army and the Indian Railways. Your politicians are too weak to confront it. So instead, again, you need a social movement. But now you have been hoodwinked by DG ISPR into saying that, Indian Army is sacrosanct. I don't understand. Why can't they go to Karimnagar? Why can't we have whatever command you have in Karimnagar? Why does the Western Naval Command have to sit in South Bombay when we have built them a huge base in Karwar? So I'd have to drill down these questions. I'm not just singling out the army because the army is particularly apparent in every metro in India. With clothes, I'm afraid I'll have to tell you an anecdote, but with agriculture, we've made a start, and I think we need to do much, much more. But first, socially, we need to get rid of the idea that somebody living on the land is a liability. Farmers need to make more money, and you have to be willing to pay more for your food. And we have to stop doing things like import when food becomes more expensive. The poor can't afford food anyway, so the subsidy is all about us, and we need to stop it fast. So that reform, I think, is essential. I don't care about labor reforms, land reform, law reforms, all that. I don't care about land reform because the state is the largest landowner. So take the land from the state. Who's stopping you? Why are we getting this superfluous conversation about not the largest landowner? Let the largest landowner show the way. Okay. Education, I don't know. Healthcare, I think we have a great opportunity with Corona. We have a great opportunity to try and invest in affordable, labor-intensive healthcare systems. And that can be done either by the private sector or by the state. The biggest shortage there which we have to invest in is human resources. So we should start doing it today. And we should make it far more attractive for nurses to work in India than to work in Dubai. The second most literate state in India is Himachal Pradesh. My mother was in ICU last year. I found that if the nurses were not Kerala, they were Himachali. So Himachali women who are getting educated are becoming nurses. We have to foster these people. But I don't see society doing that. A society that spits on doctors who are treating corona is not a society that deserves or will ever deliver the kind of respect. So I'm very pessimistic. Again, I need social reform. It always comes back to that repeatedly. So I can solve these. And I'll tell you again why I need social reform. Now, here's the interesting example of textiles. So I went to these guys who produce these shirts. They're mainly in a place called Tirupur in South Gujarat. And I asked them, I said, boss, why don't you produce 400 rupee shirts? I'm an economist, so I want you to make money here. I'll never say anything to anybody that involves charity or altruism. And an economist, everybody must make money, including the farm. Make money, 15% return, sabko hona chahiye. That should be a slogan. Sabka saath, sabka 15% vikas. But they said, no. You see, first they said margin nahi hai. Then they said, I said, kyun margin nahi hai? They said, well, labor costs are very high. I said, why are labor costs high? They showed me. I said, but you're getting the wrong end of the stick. These are labor and land costs in Tirupur, near Coimbatore, and South Gujarat. I don't mean there. You have to locate in UP, Bihar, Bengal, where you have cheap labor. It's competitive with Bangladesh. The market is also there only, largely for these shirts. There's not a volume there. Why you want logistics from Tamil Nadu? It's a silly place to set up a unit if you want to produce volume shirts. Then they said, no, there are no skills there. We can't get skilled. I said, bullshit, 25% of your workforce on your shop floor is coming from Bengal, Bihar, UP, Tamil Nadu, Orissa. All this migrant labor, upar niche, based on money. Huh? Then the real thing came. They said, we can't do business there. Their nature is bad. Mr. Adityanand doesn't realize this. You can do all the labor laws you want, but you can't protect your women. Not just can't protect your women, you demonstrably then increase exploitation of someone who's faced a tragedy. Then people will say what these people said to me. But I think that's also wishful thinking. I don't think Tirupur is that different from UP. I have to say it in Hindi. They said, "Unka swabhav hi kharab hai, aap samajhte." So they had political economy distrust of investing where all our labor is. They had the capital. They could see the business case. And a consequence of that is we are importing from Bangladesh. So on textiles, I've zeroed in on the problem, but I'm afraid it will happen again and again. And I'm afraid many people are not even looking at that. I get it on Twitter all the time and say, but you are a technical person, provide technical solutions. I say, Baba, if it was there, I would give it to you. Like I once told somebody who wanted to give me a $5 million grant to improve the quality of state public finances. They said, there must be some technical. I said, there's no technical problem in India. The technical problem would have fixed it. Unfortunately, the problem is much more profound. And I've given you now very concrete examples in education, in textiles, and in agriculture. We will have to change attitudes, we will have to reorient ideologies, and at the moment there is simply no political force which is willing or able to do it. All I can do is propose such an ideology by writing a book, which I am doing and which I'll place before you in March, and then let's see what happens.
The argument seems to be for this government that, in spite of an accelerated GDP growth in the first decade of 2000, actually it has happened by crony capitalism, and they've handed over problems to the succeeding government, and we are not able to get out of it. So looking forward, unless we rectify that, we can't go forward, and we are not able to rectify it because we don't have enough capital. And the losses are too much. And like what Arvind Subramanian said, it's a twin balance sheet problem. What do you think of that?
It's a current age problem. Title of my talk was Looking Back, Looking Forward. If you don't address the existential and systemic issues that I've been highlighting, then fixing the banking system would be nice, but nothing much will happen. If you want to address those, then of course it is imperative to fix the banking system. But immediately on doing so, you're going to take away load. No? The reason why we have these crises, one major reason, of course, is agricultural credit. Why do my discounts not work? My discounts don't work because of agriculture and what I'm doing with agricultural power. So if you make that a viable business where everyone makes 15% return, these problems will go away, your balance sheet will get strengthened. Your entrepreneurs in this country, you need a broader class of entrepreneurs, but for that broader class of entrepreneurs to emerge, they must emerge from the place where the labor force is, for which I need us to start investing in these larger things. There's plenty of talent, I met them. There's no technical problem. There never is in India. India is a country where you can produce lots of technical people. Plumbers to both. Architecture of this house that has been added on to since 1991. That architecture is faulty. We need structural engineers to come in and alter the architecture. What Arvind has correctly done is pointed out today's problem today. What I'm trying to point out to you is that yesterday's and today's problems are going to take away one very important reason to discuss the economy. It's no fun discussing the Philippine economy. It's okay. Might as well discuss movies. The fun of discussing the Indian economy was the aspiration we all had as common aspiration as Indians to transform this country through discernibly increased prosperity. That has gone, and that has to come back.
There is one question, Rathin, that has been asked, passed on to me to ask to you. You have asked for social mobilization, you have asked for political mobilization, but it appears that the citizen, the voter, doesn't really care whether there is economic growth that happens or not. And demonetization, the way the pandemic was handled, all these are examples of the fact that it doesn't matter to them. What do you have to say?
I completely agree. But I thought I made that very clear.
Yeah.
Your voter is living in a rationed economy. In a rationed economy, I grew up in one, you have no aspiration. And you have no expectation. Because what does a rationed economy do? It takes away your agency. You know, my agency to go and buy a rail ticket, how to explain to young people here, was not there when I was young. It was a complicated business. To get a telephone was a complicated business. So I remember the rationed life. I don't think it was a nice life. Much better for me than somebody below my pay grade. But at least it was not a nice life. They are still there. That India has not changed. And if that India doesn't change, you will get people that vote according to what they feel will best protect their interests and expectations. Which is, whether it is Congress or BJP or Samajwadi Party or Mr. Naidu or Mr. Reddy or whatever, either determined by a social discourse in which they do feel agency, or an economic discourse in which those people promise to deliver them rationing in a way that they find credible. Some combination of these will determine your choice, but remember, that is happening because you have taken away aspiration. If there is no aspiration, then there is no aspirational election. If there is no aspirational election, then the results will always be what you see. You are getting the politicians you get responding to the issues you get for a very good reason. We are not their constituency. So we have to increase people like us so that their constituency becomes people like us, and that involves that collaborative effort in social mobilization.